All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College Application and Website Development, or AWD 1100 Programming Fundamentals with C# course, I've been creating a series of video presentations based on the PowerPoint slides for our textbook for the class. That textbook being Muroc C# 7th edition. And I'm almost smack dab in the middle. I've done all of Section 1 and Section 2, and I'm in my second part of Chapter 12 and Section 3, how to create and use classes. And this is where we left off last time, so I am going to pick it up from right here. So they show the code here for this is our product maintenance form. And notice, because there's some stuff in here that you probably haven't seen before, so it may look a little confusing. This private list, this is going to be our list of products. This is that thing that's going to be showing here. All right, that's our list of products. All right. Here is going to be in our load event, and that's where we're going to call get products, so we can fill that. So it'll go and grab it. All right, it's going to call get products, and it's going to fill that up. It's going to get the products and then fill up the list box. So to fill that up, that basically this is just filling up that list box that I just showed you. This is the code that's going to get called when we click the add button. This is the code that's going to be clicked or run when we have clicked the delete button. So that's the add button. That's the delete button. If we click the add product button, it should bring up this form. If we click the delete product button, we have to have a product selected. And so let's say we didn't want this Muroc Java programming anymore. We click on that, we click on the delete product, and it would bring up a dialog saying, are you sure you want to delete that? And if we said yes, it would be gone. All right. And then there we have our exit routine. So this is the code for a new product. And again, I'm not expecting that it's going to totally make sense to everybody. All right. So notice we've got in our save button, we check and make sure that it's valid data. What does that mean? We want to make sure that we've got these fields filled in. So in other words, what does is valid data do? It's going to come in and it's going to check and make sure that we've got a product code in there, that the code is present. It's going to make sure that we've got a description in there, that the description is present. And it's going to make sure that for our price that it's in there and it's a decimal. If any of these fail, it'll return an error message. If there is a code, if there is a description, if there is a price, that'll mean there is no error message. Okay? So it'll basically just come in there and it'll return success. Boom. But if there is an error in here, then it'll set success to false and return success. So with the validator class, what we're doing is we're making sure that only valid data gets put into the system. And if we don't have valid data, we don't allow it in. This is especially important when you are working with databases, because the worst thing you can do with a database is to compromise the data and allow bad data into the system. So this is the is present, and notice in here, all right, it's got string value and string name. All right, here we've got string value and string name. All right, and what are we doing in here? If there is no value, so that's going to be basically, that's going to be the value that's going to be either the code or it's going to be the value of the description. How does it know if it's the value for the product code or for the product description? It's that name property. And it gets that name property from the tag. Here's another one, but it's saying we want to parse this and we want to make sure that we give it a decimal amount for the price. Now, one thing they're not doing here that they could do is not only, they've got an is present and an is decimal. Remember, we saw those here. They're not doing a range in here. When you do the range, so since we're not doing a range in here, all right, since we're not doing a range for this, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, it means it would be, technically, it should be legal there to put in a negative amount for a price, which you wouldn't want to allow. So we might want to put more in there than that. Now, when we are doing our gets and sets with properties, there is a way to automatically put this in as just get set. If we type in public, for example, public product code, for example, and we just type in get set, just like that, then the system automatically sets it up like this. All right, so let's say we did public, so let's say it was the description. You can see what that looks like. And if we came in here and just typed in public product description get set, it would do it like we was just shown, right, like this. If we want to read only, we could do it like this. If we wanted to write only, we could do it as well. All right. This won't make a boatload of sense until we've gone over it in more depth and breadth of coverage. All right, so here's a read-only property. Now, you can do this with these expression bodies, which is using the equal greater than operator. I'm going to hold off on that because you've already had way too much stuff explained to you. All right, but you can rewrite this as this. We'll see both as we get going in here. What's the advantage of this over this? Brevity. Other than that, not too much. Here is writing it, a method that returns the value. Here's the same one with an expression body again. So there's no return. This is important because this will be very similar to when we use these. These are typically referred to as arrow functions. And when we use arrow functions in the AWD1100 data-driven websites class, all right, that you'll take later. Again, here's another example of using an expression body and another one. All right. You can also use tuples within these, and I'm not going to go into tuples now. Why? Because, again, the idea behind this is to introduce you to some of this stuff, not inundate so much of it in there that you're confused. You can check, okay? So you can check, for example, here using the type of and the get type. As it says, it checks an object's type. This is for C# 6.0 and later. There's also, rather than doing it like this, you can do it like this in 7.0 and later. And there's different ways that you can do this stuff. All right. Again, it's not my goal here to confuse you. Most people tell me that this is amongst the most confusing lectures they hear in this class anyway. So here's another way we can set things up. So they're just going to show you a bunch of these different ways here. All right. Using generate from usage to generate a class. If you put something like this in here and you haven't created the class yet. So if we put this line of code in here, we don't have a class. All right. If we put our mouse over this, one of the things it'll say is, hey, do you want me to generate a new class for you called product? And if you click that in a new file, it'll make this. Very similar to as if we had right mouse clicked, chosen add, all right, and then pick class from there. I don't understand the advantage of doing it this way as opposed to doing it manually. So that's all I'm going to say about that. All right. The Solution Explorer with the members of the class displayed, so you can get some IntelliSense help from this stuff, in other words. The peak definition, typically with peak is a look ahead type of thing. So you can look at it and make sure that you haven't fallen off the edge, so to speak. All right. And the last part of this chapter talks about structures. All right. A structure is not a class, but it's something you can use in lieu of a class. So if you've got something that only has a few different members in it, Rather than creating a class, you can create a structure. It'll look very similar, except where earlier we had public class product, it now says public struct product. All right. You can make structures that are read-only. And notice that you set stuff up very similarly to the way we set it up with classes. Again, don't want to go into this in too much depth and breadth of coverage. I already feel like I'm inundating you with so much information as it is, and I'm trying to keep it to where it's manageable. Okay? All right. Let's see. You can compare structures to see if they're equal to one another. You can copy a structure from one structure to another. You can also work with records. All right. Now this is fairly new because it didn't come up until C# 9.0 and later. But again, you'll notice this looks very similar. Okay. So what I think I'm going to do, because I'm almost finished here, this is what's there at the end of the end of the chapter. We've got this inventory class, then a calculator, then assigning tickets. That's two parts. I may or may not do this. I'm going to do my own in just a couple minutes, but I'm going to go in here and right before we finish, because this should be very short so far. I've only been going for 12 minutes, so before I finish up, give me about 5 to 10 minutes, and hopefully I can do it in that time. So I'm going to Google differences between C# classes, structures, and records. Let's let somebody else with a little bit more than experience than me talk about the differences. All right. You can define a record the same way that you define a class or a structure. The difference is, again, instead of using class or struct, you use record. A record type can be defined as being a value or a reference type. Okay, big deal. So let's see. How about let's go to the Microsoft documentation. Overview of classes, structs, and records in C#. I would say concentrate on classes. All right, and then worry about structures and records. So that is right here. I have to make this smaller. That'll be good. So as always, we don't need this. So it's docs.microsoft.com/en-us.net C# fundamentals object oriented. Maybe I should have started here. I don't know. All right. I'm not going to read a bit of this. Notice they talk about encapsulation members, which is what we call basically properties. And there's a lot of stuff in here that we didn't hit on. In the later chapter, we'll talk inheritance, we'll talk interfaces, generic types, etc. All right. So C# 9 introduces the record type. And the key thing to that is a lot of other programming languages have a record data type, where C# never did. It does now. All right. Last thing I'm going to do here, because one of these things, well, let's look at this. When to use a record versus a class versus a structure. Stack Overflow, if you've never heard of it before, I call it kind of Facebook for developers. All right, but it's much more serious than Facebook. All right. Can your data be a value type? If so, make it a structure. If not, does your type describe a value like preferably immutable state? Yes, go with record. So use a class otherwise. Now, I don't expect that to make a boatload of sense, but I just wanted you to see that. So I have now finished with the lecture on Chapter 12. When I come back, I am going to go through my own example, all right, I think, I don't know, because I'm gonna quickly write something up first. Then I'll come back and do the lecture. So I will come back and do that in just a couple moments.